Hi, I'm Michael Arnold. You might remember me from the other videos on Tiresome, the greatest YouTube channel ever. And I'm here to talk about my 1969 Lotus 59 Formula 3. So first off, how we got the car. My father, John, he was just a really big racing car fan, and he had racing cars and all that kind of stuff. And in the late 1960s into the early 1970s, he used to just go to the races just like everyone else does. And he used to follow Formula 3. And in 1969, the Lotus 59 was the car to have. It won every sort of race it was in. Emerson Fittipaldi drove one, Jochen Rindt drove one, and James Hunt drove one.
Hi everyone, Mike from the future here. I just want to make something very clear, and that is that the car that Michael Arnold is sat in front of right now, the one that is on the video that you are watching, is James Hunt's car. That's the car that was in the Crystal Palace race, the infamous bit of footage where he has a car crash. It's also the one that is featured in the film Rush, and Michael Arnold owns it. I just want that to be very, very clear. The one that he's resting his arm on right now, that's James Hunt's car. I think Mike's too modest to kind of just say it outright, but just so we know, this car's very, very special, and it's amazing to be in the presence of it. Back to the show!
In 1974, my father moved to Montreal, Canada. And in Montreal, he started club racing again with his racing cars, and he ended up going to Mosport. Now in Mosport, there was a driver school called the Jim Russell Driver School, which was a British school that had come over from Snetterton. He got along really well with the guy from the driver school, and so he got a tour, and he saw this car. But it didn't look like this when it was there. He was using it as a Formula Ford car, as a student car, because Lotus was the Jim Russell Driver School was a customer of Lotus's. And they used to get all their cars, because Snetterton and the Lotus factory are like a 20-minute drive away from each other. My dad spotted the car and he said, I know that car. And he went, yeah. He said, when you're done with it, can I have it? Because he knows that every couple of years a driver school has to update their cars for new technology, because cars are always getting better and better, so you gotta learn on the new equipment. And the guy said, yeah, absolutely. So they kept in touch, and in the early 80s, I think it was like 81, 82, the guy said, we're getting rid of all our cars, do you still want the Lotus? And he went, yes I do. And he bought the car from the Jim Russell Driver School in Mosport for 2,000 Canadian dollars. Now, when I say that, it didn't look like this at all. They had steel wheels on it with Formula Ford wheels. This would have been with it. This body is something that I put on it. My dad already had an original body for it, which is actually hanging on the wall behind me. It had a Formula Ford engine in it. The Formula 3 engine in it that it's in now was my father's that he had from 1968. The gearbox, my father, well, I think it came with the gearbox, but it was the chassis and a couple of suspension parts. It wasn't the full car. And it sat in a garage for a couple of years until my dad put a Formula Ford engine in it, and my mother raced it in vintage racing in Colorado for 2 or 3 years. She did quite well at it. And then he put it in the back of the barn, and it sat there until the people from Rush, the Formula 3 section in the Ron Howard film Rush, contacted us and said they wanted the car in the film. So the car was shipped back to Britain, and it's been here. It's been with me ever since, really. And then my father passed away, and I inherited the car. So that's the story of how we got the car. The history of James Hunt and Lotus 59. The 1970 season was when he raced the 59, and it was an interesting year, because the year before he raced a Brabham in Formula 3 and he did okay, and he was one of these up-and-coming racing drivers, and he was looking for sponsorship. Now he had 2 sponsors that season, Molly Slip, which is a oil and grease company, and Lotus was his other sponsor. Now what it was is Molly Slip gave him money to buy the engine. Okay, so he bought a whole bay 69 F3 engine, R69 whole bay engine, 1000 cc Screamer engine, and the car came from Lotus himself. So Colin Chapman was always on the lookout for new and up-and-coming drivers, and James Hunt was one that he had his eye on, but he wasn't going to offer him a Team Lotus drive. Now, there were 2 Team Lotus drivers in that were driving 59s, but James Hunt was kind of the unofficial 3rd Team Lotus driver. He was never official Team Lotus. That's why the car's not covered in their sponsorship. But Colin Chapman gave him the car as the sponsorship. So it was like, you drive my car with your engine, and you pay for tires and blah blah blah, yada yada yada. So that's what James Hunt did, but he had to pay them back. He had to pay his sponsorship back. They fronted him the money, and he had to pay them back before he started making any money back. And so he didn't actually do the British Formula 3 Championship, which a lot of drivers did. And he went headhunting. So he went to all the races that had the biggest purses. So he went to Monaco, he went to Pau, he went to Zandvoort, he went to all the European countries. He even, I think, I have a list of all of them, I don't have them with me. But he did race in Brands Hatch. He did race at Crystal Palace. He did race at Silverstone. But they were British Formula 3 events, but he didn't do all of them because he was off in Europe racing in other things. He only won 2 races in a 59. He won in France, and I think he won in the Netherlands. And he came 2nd at Brands Hatch here in this country. He DNF'd a lot of the times. He kept breaking the car. If you look at the pictures of the evolution of the car, it starts out with, it's all red, and then all of a sudden it gets these little black bits because he keeps scraping the nose, and he puts a black bit underneath the nose, and the nose was all red, and so he became known for having this black nose. So when they put this body on it, it started out with the body behind me, and then halfway through the season, Lotus updated their aerodynamics. They put this body on it, he still kept the black nose. Just because he had a reputation of running into things, I guess. I don't know. Yeah. But some of the funny stories about this one was when they failed to qualify at Monaco, him and his friend were in a panic because they thought they'd qualify for the race. And every race that you qualified for, you got what was called starters money. And it was like, now it's 1970, you'd get 25, 50 quid just for qualifying in the race. And they would use that money as their expenses. Well, they didn't qualify, so they didn't get the money. So they were obviously in the south of France with no money, the car and the van to try and get it back to Britain. They had no money for fuel. So it's in James Hunt's book that him and his friend were running around late at night looking for unlocked gas caps, petrol caps, to siphon gas out of the car to put it in their van. They got as far as Lyon when James Hunt's brother came across the channel to give him money so they could get back. And I think at the end of the season, James Hunt did 20 races in this car, and then he was 500 pounds short. So he actually lost money driving this car. But it gave him enough to then move on to Formula 2, where he met when he started driving for March, and then that started that's where he met Pete Postlethwaite and Bubbles Horsley and Lord Hesketh. Now in the movie Rush, they meet him in Formula 3. Not true. They met him the next year, 71, 72, when James Hunt was racing in Formula 2. And that's when he made the jump into Formula 1 in 1974? I think so. Yeah. But, yeah. So, but the Lotus 59 and the Brabham BT28 were the 2 cars that won it. And in 1969, if you take all the races, the Lotus 59 was number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, 5 was a Brabham BT28, and number 6 was another Lotus 59. So it was a totally dominant car of its era, and it to the point where these cars were too expensive to be an entry level, because Formula 3 was designed to be the entry level. So it was designed in 1964 to be the entry level into open wheel racing in Europe. So it was let's go back to 1962, where it was Formula 1 and Formula Junior. Okay, that's what they called it, open wheel cars. And then in 1964, they all got together and said, all right, well, no, we have too many people involved in the sport. We need to have another formula. So they said, okay, we'll have Formula 3, which will be this formula, 1 liter single carburetor. Formula 2 will be 1 liter 4 carburetors, and Formula 1 was 1.5, 8 V8s, all a wonderful thing. And then in 1967, Formula Ford is introduced, but by 1970, it was very clear that Formula Ford was the cheap option and Formula 3 was too expensive. Because Formula 3 had bigger wheels, magnesium wheels, alloy brakes, and it was sort of a jumping off point to get into Formula 2 and Formula 3, and it was expensive. For example, in 1969, you could buy this car with an engine for £2,500, which was roughly the cost of a house back then. Whereas you could buy a Formula Ford car with an engine, same year, a Lotus 61, which was the same year that this car came out, for £500. So that was the big difference. So in 1971, they did another change. So they went, okay, Formula Ford is 1.6 single carburetor, steel wheels. That'll be the entry level. Formula 3 is going to be 1600, 1.6 again, but with bigger wheels, wings, and all that kind of stuff. And then they had Formula 2 and Formula 1 from on there. And so this car was so dominant and so expensive, they went, no, we need to change all of it. And they did. And it was this was sort of an end of an era for racing cars back then, because like everything else, everything moved up to wings and stuff. So this was the last sort of years of non-aerodynamic. It was all mechanical and all sprung and all, adjusted that way. Okay, let's see what it sounds like. So that's my Lotus 59. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to Tiresome. It's, like I said, best YouTube channel about cars. And yeah, thank you very much.